Good morning, everybody. It's Friday at 10:30, and we're going to start with the new weekly Paycheck Protection Program webinar. I've got a poll that's should be up on your screens right now, and it's asking whether or not you've received your PPP loan or if you've been approved for your PPP loan. It's been up for a couple minutes now. I'll give it another couple minutes. There have been, just in the past 20 hours, some new information that's come out. Not that it was entirely unexpected, but just confirmation of what we thought was probably going to happen. I'll cover that at the end. I've got a couple questions that have come in from clients. If you have questions, go ahead and post them to the chat box on the right. You can either send it directly to me or you can send it to a group. The attendee list is still filling out a little bit, so give that a second. I'll leave this poll question up too. We'll start with some pretty basic stuff here. I'm going to switch screens to go to my version of QuickBooks Online. Actually, this is a more or less a demo account. So if I jump over to QuickBooks Online, one of the questions are I received several of the same question multiple times this week, and it had to do with how do we record the deposit, or how do we record the receipt of the money? So I'm going to show you that in QuickBooks Online here. So you should be able to see my my window with QuickBooks Online. And this is not actually the Financial Clarity Group books, but we'll give you a couple examples of how it can be recorded, the deposit can be recorded. So if you go to New and Bank Deposit, you would pick the bank account that received the money, the date the money was put in, and this date may correspond to the spreadsheet as well. You're going to leave the received from box empty, and this is contrary to what many people might think. But this box, when you're making a bank deposit, actually creates an entry against a customer, and you don't want to do that in this case. The account that you're going to use is generally going to be probably a new account, and you might call it PPP loan, or US Bank PPP loan, or GE Credit PPP loan, or something like that. So it's identifiable on your balance sheet. Now in this case, the account doesn't exist, so I'm going to add it. And the account type is, at least for now, I would code it as a current liability, and it is currently just called a loan. Again, the name, if you use general ledger numbers, you would put it here. More than likely, it's going to start with a 2, like a 2050 or something like that, because it's a liability account. You can put a description in if you wish, and then save and close. So now you can use that account. You can put a description in here if you want. Payment method really doesn't matter. The reference number doesn't matter. The amount of the deposit will match what went into your bank. In this particular company file, we have classes set up, but there generally wouldn't be a class on a loan. And then you can save that journal entry. Now what that did is it created a deposit into your bank account and set up a loan on your balance sheet. I'm going to end this poll. The other way that you could do it is via journal entry. So if you click on New and Journal Entry, your journal entry window pops up. And again, you would pick the date that it was deposited in your account. give it some sort of description. We tell it the account is the PPP loan account. You may have to create this if this is the way you went. The deposit amount, I don't remember what I used on the last one. This is going to be, should be a credit actually, because liabilities have credit balances and you're creating a credit balance. The offsetting account is going to be your bank, and it might be your checking account. And again, you can put a description on either of the two lines, or you can copy that description and paste it in there if you want. It's not necessary to put either of those in there. And again, you would leave the name blank on both lines, and more than likely you would leave the class blank as well. And then you can save and close that. And that also creates the loan on your balance sheet, and it puts the money into the bank account. Now, some clients or some recipients of PPP money may actually be setting up a separate bank account. You would just use that bank account to record the deposit or the journal entry. Any questions on that? Very good. So I'm going to now switch to a brief agenda list that I have. And I'm going to put up another poll. Have you received your PPP money? So my real brief agenda. So recording deposit of the PPP money, you might have to set up a new general ledger account for the loan. It would be a current liability. My suggestion is that once the repayment starts, you switch the account type to long-term liability, because it changes it to a 2-year note. Generally, short-term liabilities are things that are due within 12 months. Things that are due beyond the first 12 months are considered long-term. In accounting, there's some other stuff that we do in that, but for this purpose, it's not critical either way. Health insurance. I received an email from a longtime client this morning about health insurance. They are an S corporation and have been treating their health insurance as distributions throughout the year. So instead of adding them to their W-2 wages, they've been treating them as distributions, and we have to add them to W-2 wages at the end of the year and add them as wages on their personal 1040, and then take the self-employed health insurance deduction on their 1040. For 2020, or at least this 8-week period, health insurance premiums for not just your employees, but you as the owner should be included in the amount that's forgiven. So you would treat them when you send the information to the bank requesting forgiveness of part of the loan, the amounts paid for health insurance for you and your family that are paid by the company should be included in that calculation. So they should also be forgiven. S corporations have always had some specific hoops to jump through when it comes to self-employed health insurance or owner health insurance. Generally, that health insurance is supposed to be added to the owner's W-2 wages, not subject to self-employment tax, not subject to Social Security Medicare tax, but then it gets deducted on their personal income tax return. It's just one of the oddities of being an S corporation. So with that out of the way, one of the biggest things that has come up, like I said at the beginning, just in the last 20 hours or so, I got notified by another colleague of mine that the IRS has released specific information related to how the expenses that are paid with PPP money, forgiven PPP money, are going to be treated. And this is Notice 2020-32. And it goes back to what I alluded to last week. Section 265 of the Internal Revenue Code says that any expenses that are paid with non-taxable dollars are not deductible. And essentially, that's what the IRS is confirming here. So essentially what's going to happen is, to the extent you have a Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiven, the costs that were forgiven, or to the extent you were forgiven, the expenses that were paid will not be deductible on your return. So essentially it's a wash. You're not paying tax, you're not including the loan amount as revenue, and you're not deducting the expenses, which is more or less what I thought was going to happen. It prevents the double dip. In other words, the non-taxability of the revenue and the deductibility of the expenses. That's not generally how the IRS works. So that's the big news that came out yesterday. Again, it's notice 2020-32. To the extent your loan is forgiven, the expenses that are paid with the loan proceeds that are forgiven are not going to be deductible as business expenses. Does anybody have any questions related to that? The way it's going to play out on your tax return, if you're a corporation, C corporation or an S corporation, you're going to have what are called M1 adjustments. And those are adjustments that reconcile the book income to the tax income. Essentially, you're going to have one line that says income on the books, not on tax return, and that amount is going to be your loan proceeds. And then you're going to have a line on the M1 that's for expenses on the books that are not on the tax return. Those two numbers may or may not be the same. If your full loan is forgiven, they probably will be the same. To the extent your loan is not forgiven, then the two numbers might be different. I'm going to close out this poll. So now we're a couple weeks into people having received money. Hopefully you're able to take advantage of the spreadsheet we provided after last week's call, and it's starting to come alive with the information that you put in based on your loan amount. If you happen to receive an EIDL grant, you would put it here, and it reduces the amount that's possible to be forgiven. Calculate your full-time employees as of March 4th and the period from February 15th to June 30th of 19, and also February 1st of 20 to February 29th of 20. If you're self-employed, a Schedule C filer, you would put your net Schedule C income here, the date your loan was funded, and these boxes start the spreadsheet into motion. The week ending periods will be based on the funding date. Your full-time equivalencies during each of these periods will help determine ultimately how much of the loan is forgivable, and then start filling in as you make payments. And that will keep the spreadsheet alive. And again, at the bottom, we're just roughly estimating that the loan would be forgiven, or most of the loan would be able to be forgiven because, or at least the amount that was spent would be forgiven because you've stayed within the ratio of 75% being used for payroll type expenses. If for some reason you haven't received the spreadsheet, send an email to webinar@financialclaritygroup.com and we'll be sure to get a copy to you. Those are the big things that I wanted to share this week. The primary one is this, the big one is this notice from the IRS about non-deductibility of the expenses. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to go through them or go through the spreadsheet specific to your situation. Give it a second here. Okay, everybody. If we don't have any questions, I'm going to wrap it up. Hopefully we can keep you updated through each of these weekly sessions. Hopefully they're short and to the point and clear enough that we can take action and keep you up to date and be able to get as much of your loan forgiven as possible. I do have a question here. It says, does employer state include unemployment? Back on the spreadsheet, Dave. So what we're looking for here is the employer state unemployment. Now, the amount that I have showing on the spreadsheet here would be, if I remember correctly, a rough calculation of what the unemployment might be based on the most recent payroll. The way that I'm reading the instructions for the forgiveness is that it's based on the amounts that are paid during the period. So if you happen to pay your first quarter 2020 state unemployment, the amount might be more significant than that because the employees max out in that first quarter. So I'm thinking it's the amount that was paid. And yeah, the ER state payroll taxes would be state unemployment. We included a line for local because they allow for local payroll taxes. But in Ohio, we don't have any employer or local payroll taxes that get paid. But I include the line just so people in other areas might be able to use it. If you fund your retirement plan based on each payroll, or if you have an amount that needs to be deposited, you could probably put that in there as well. George, for utilities, yeah, I think garbage would be included in that. So you might have a weekly number that goes in that every time you pay it. It has to be paid, not just picked up and they bill you for it. So make sure you get the payments out during the period. Again, the expenses below this, in other words, down here, cannot exceed 25% of your total. And that's what we're trying to track down here at the bottom. To the extent you've spent money, as long as this ratio stays 75% payroll, this thing's going to stay green. And again, this is just a tool to give you an idea of where you stand. And these need to be actual payments too. That's what I was saying about the garbage. They may pick it up weekly, but do they bill you weekly, or can you pay it weekly? Because you have to actually make the payments within the 8-week period. If they bill you, they pick up weekly and they only bill you once a month, you may only end up getting one payment in there if you pay by the month. Somebody's asking to speak. See if I can bring you in here, George. If the employee pays for a portion percentage and the company pays remaining, I assume the portion that the company pays gets included in the health insurance. Yeah, that would be my understanding. If the employee is contributing toward the cost of the health insurance, that's not being paid by the company. So the only costs that you're going to include in here in the spreadsheet are going to be costs that the company actually pays. Now, it might be have to think about that for a little bit. It might be possible that maybe the company just pick up 100% of the cost for the 8-week period. That way the employee isn't out the money and it's going to be forgiven anyway. I do have one other thing that I wanted to mention. Let me see if I can find it real quick. A friend of mine is doing a webinar on Saturday. Sure, I've got the right one here. No, that's not it. On marketing and such. And I told him that I would send it out to people. Let me see if I can find it here. So if we go here, yeah, let's see if I can switch over to this. Give you guys something fun to grow your business while we're in this mess. So this is a friend of mine, Kenny Harper's down in Jacksonville. He does some really good stuff and has helped me create a path for my business from a marketing standpoint. Things will be rolling out next 6 months, taking some things that I'd already created and fine-tuning them and putting them together. The webinar is at, I'll put in the chat box here for you. If you have a business, this would be a good thing for you guys to check out. No cost, no obligations, any of that kind of stuff. There we go. All right, so that's Kenny. Jump back over here. Spreadsheet back up. There we go. Any other questions about the spreadsheet? Non-deductibility of expenses, recording the loan in your books. If you use something other than QuickBooks, obviously the process is going to be similar. More than likely, you would still do a bank deposit or a journal entry to record it. I can bring those back up if you'd like. Otherwise, let's see. Is there anything else I need to show you guys? I think that's going to do it for, I got one more. Funds are received and deposited into your account on a date that your payroll date does not end on. Do you need to change your payroll date? If the funds are received and deposited into your account on a date that your payroll date does not end on, you don't, your payroll dates don't need to correspond to when the money came in. I would not change your payroll dates to accommodate the PPP loan unless you got to the end of your 8-week period and you had money left over that you would otherwise be paying out as payroll anyway, or you needed to get some money paid out in payroll to get your ratio back in line with the 75-25. So yeah, you don't need to line it up. It's just a function of during the 8-week period, you need to pay it out. And Dave says he noticed the date is, it should be editable, Dave. This date should be editable. These dates calculate based on this date, 7 days, 14 days, etc. So it's not so much end of the calendar week or end of the payroll week. It's just end of your first week since the money came in, since you have 8 weeks. So the end of 8 weeks is going to be June 11th, which may not be a weekend day. It happens to be a Thursday. Okay, any other questions? If anything comes up between now and next Friday at 10:30, send them to webinar at, I'll put it in the chat box here, webinar at financialclaritygroup.com, and we'll try to cover them on the next call. We are still receiving a lot of phone calls and emails about the stimulus checks. We really aren't able to give out much information. We don't have any access to any special information related to the IRS or any way to look up things. If your questions are related to that, the best we can do is refer you to the IRS website. The thing I keep reminding people is that if people don't get the check or don't get the direct deposit, that if they're eligible, they will get the credit on their 2020 tax return. It's not a get it or lose it kind of thing. It's actually a prepayment of a refundable 2020 tax credit. That's a mouthful. It just means that on your 2020 tax return, if you have not already received the credit, you'll get it. It will offset any tax that you have or increase your refund. The Paycheck Protection Program information, it continues to evolve. We're still waiting for information from the SBA and the other various organizations, Department of Labor, in my opinion, specifically about how the calculation is supposed to be handled for the full-time equivalency and the forgiveness calculation. We got clarification on deductibility of expenses. I think there was one other large thing that I mentioned last week that's escaping me right now. But we will continue to keep you updated, and we'll see you again next Friday, the 8th at 10:30 in the morning, and provide you with whatever updates we can and answer any other questions that we can related to the Paycheck Protection Loan. Again, we're in this together. I know that small businesses are going to be the ones that get us out of this, and I think the way the loans were handled in the first place was not helpful, put it that way, for small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of our country, and whether that wants to be recognized or not, we know that's true. We thank you for your patience as we work through the backlog of things that we have here. And as always, we greatly appreciate the trust and confidence that you place in us. I'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend. Thank you.